Just a second. Yeah. Okay. Again, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Diana Pais, Senior Director for Energy and Mobility at the William Davidson Institute at the University of Michigan. We're really excited to present another webinar in our series of webinars under the Chihuahua Charging Forward project. This one is focused on bringing e-mobility innovations from research to market, a commercialization roadmap, and resources that we hope a lot of universities and other stakeholders in Chihuahua will find helpful. Today, I'm joined by my colleagues, Dana Schweizer-Gorodetsky and Paul Clyde, also from the William Davidson Institute. Dana works in all of our e-mobility projects and is a program manager for energy and mobility here at the Institute. And Paul Clyde is president of the William Davidson Institute and professor at the Ross School of Business. It's great to see a lot of familiar faces today. Thank you very much for joining us. For those that are maybe not familiar with William Davidson Institute, we are a research and educational nonprofit affiliated with the University of Michigan, and our mission is to equip decision makers with the tools for commercial success in low and middle income countries. We do this via research, consulting, and knowledge dissemination. And in the energy and mobility sector, we conduct research and provide consulting services to help innovators and entrepreneurs tap into new opportunities. We also are focused on developing tools and resources to highlight business innovations happening in emerging markets and disseminate that knowledge. And we craft and implement partnerships across sectors and markets to advance the energy transition in low and middle income countries. As part of our partnership with the state of Chihuahua, we have been working with multiple stakeholders, including the Secretaría de Innovación y Desarrollo Económico, our primary partner, Instituto de Innovación y Competitividad, and Frente Norte, all three partners under the Chihuahua Charging Forward project. This partnership is focused on helping the state advance the transition to electric mobility, creating and disseminating knowledge, and fostering collaboration across the three main areas of industry engagement in the electric vehicle value chain, really zeroing in on related opportunities for businesses, as well as for other sectors. The second area of talent development for the EV transition and all of the implications for academia, as well as fostering a wide range of connections for different sectors between Chihuahua and Michigan. And as I mentioned, we're working very closely with our partner Frente Norte, so I would like to introduce Orlando Daniel to talk about Frente Norte as well before we start with this webinar.
Thanks. Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you very much, Diana, for that introduction. My name is Orlando Daniel, Director of Frente Norte. As Diana has already told us, and I know many of you have joined us in the other webinars or presentation that we have already conducted with this project to chart the course of the e-mobility in Chihuahua. We always appreciate and thank all our partners' efforts to make this possible, especially to the Secretaría de Innovación and Desarrollo Económico, el I2C, and of course, Diana, Dana, Paul, and their team at the William Davidson Institute. Thanks a lot. I'll give you a brief introduction to what we do in Frente Norte. Frente Norte is a smart specialization strategy, or in other words, a future plan for Ciudad Juárez, in which to the three areas of specialization that you are seeing in the screen, we try to support and promote programs, projects, and strategies for Ciudad Juárez to improve in terms of innovation and technology. We are part of the Desarrollo Económico de Ciudad Juárez. We are located in the Technology Hub here in Ciudad Juárez. We invite you to visit our social media and our website to learn about all the efforts and the promise that we do and support. And without further ado, I give the floor back to Diana to continue with the presentation. Thanks a lot, Diana.
Thank you so much, Orlando. And I'd like to encourage you to introduce yourselves in the chat if you like, in terms of just your name and your institution as well. We are hoping that after the presentation, we can have an exchange and answer any questions and, just have an informal conversation with all of you. We really hope that you find this content valuable for your institution. With that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Dana.
Hi, everyone. Excited to be here with you today. So we wanted to kick things off with the goals for this presentation, just so you know what we're hoping to cover and why. So first, we're going to share what is involved in commercialization, just to make sure everyone is on the same page. And then approaches and resources that we use, which is one of many approaches that can be used by anyone, including yourselves. And I'll note that we will share these slides as well as these additional resources with you after the presentation. We're also hoping to motivate you around commercialization. So highlighting the types of value that it can bring and to whom it can create that value. Then we'll temper expectations a little bit. There are a lot of challenges and limitations involved in general, and then also with the approaches that we'll talk about. So we just want to add a dose of reality as well. And then the part where we're hoping to have a discussion at the end is to translate this to the Chihuahua context. So hear from you all what's happening in the state, what your goals may be around commercialization, and how you think these resources may or may not be able to relate to you all. So just a brief overview of the agenda. We'll start with the concept of commercialization, sharing what it's about, with a focus on what's happening at University of Michigan, our approach, and also in the state of Michigan. Then we'll talk about how we approach this type of work, the roadmap that we've developed, some of the projects we've engaged in, and some lessons learned. And then we'll have a discussion about the relevance to Chihuahua. So this, I'm sure, is basic to some of you, but just to make sure we're all on the same page. So when we talk about commercialization in academia, we're focusing on the idea of bringing research out of the lab. This is one way to translate research, but the idea is to make that you're making a new product or a process available on the market. So the steps involved can be very different depending on the product or the process or the institutions involved. But here we have just sort of a generalization of the overall process and the key steps involved. So first, of course, everything starts with the researchers. So they're developing an idea that maybe starts with basic research and then gets into the applied realm. Then once it seems like there's a concept there that could be something novel and valuable, then the next step is around protecting the intellectual property. So this may involve filing a patent or whatever the right mechanism is, but just making sure the IP is sort of documented and then protected. Next, a very important part, which sort of happens in an ongoing and iterative way from here on out, is around understanding the market. So this is a lot of kind of where WDI comes in terms of understanding if there's a market for this type of product or process, how big it is, who the customers might be, what the value proposition is, and we'll get into more of that later. And then two of the possible paths from there are to license a product to an existing company. This happens quite often in academic commercialization, or creating a new startup company and staffing that up to then bring a product, you can see, to kind of commercial scale and actually out on the market. So why should we be interested in commercialization? Here are some opportunities. So, often in academia, at research institutions or universities, we're looking for a way for research to have an impact in the real world. And this is one such way that we can do that. And there's a potential for scale if the commercialization is successful. Another sort of broad reason are that, a lot of large corporations are not necessarily investing in research and development in the ways they used to. A lot of the new exciting innovation is coming out of startups or research or spin-offs of different organizations. And then those larger companies may acquire those or license the technology. So these small players and early stage ideas are increasingly important to kind of advance R&D writ large. Of course, it's an opportunity to make money if the idea is successful, and not only for the individuals who have come up with the idea, but also potentially the university or other institutions that are involved in supporting the commercialization process. And then very near and dear to our hearts and relevant to other institutions, especially the educational ones, is that commercialization in academia presents pedagogical and educational opportunities across many disciplines. And we'll focus today talking about the potential for science and engineering, learning, business, and then also law. So I'll pause now. We want to make this interactive. If anyone has any other ideas, feel free to raise your hands or drop it in the chat if you can think of other reasons to commercialize. I actually don't think I can see if anyone's raising their hands while I'm sharing my screen. So other organizers, or just unmute yourself. Otherwise, I'll keep going, but feel free to, jump in if you think of anything. Oh, here's the chat.
It was me just encouraging any other responses there. Thank you, Dana.
Great, thanks. So yeah, so why not do it? So we'll talk about some of the challenges. So first of all, one of the challenges is that you need a driver of this whole process, someone who makes sure everything gets done and never says that's not my job. So, in this type of process, there's not really always very well defined roles or siloing of different things. So you have to have someone who's kind of owning this whole thing and willing to do whatever it takes to move it to the next stage, or else it's likely to just stall. And a reason for that is that the incentives within universities, particularly for faculty who are often focused on teaching and research that will lead to publications and these types of activities, the incentives for these actors are not typically aligned with commercialization objectives. So it really takes an extra effort and a real desire to engage in this for someone to want to do this. Of course, it requires a lot of different types of resources and types of expertise. We'll talk more about these. Progress can also be slow because, if faculty are involved, if students are involved, you rely on the academic calendar. So that can slow things down as opposed to if someone were working on this full time. And success is a long shot. So, a lot of the effort that goes into it might not lead to a successful commercial endeavor. But a point that we will emphasize throughout the presentation is that the educational benefits are real, and those can be for students, for faculty, for others in the university. So yeah, if you can think of any others, feel free to unmute or to add it in the chat. And I'll keep things moving in the meantime. So just to share a little bit about the ecosystem at the University of Michigan, the Innovation Partnerships Office is kind of the hub for all things commercialization across the university. So they have a lot of expertise here related to licensing and the intellectual property side of things. They also have teams that support startup companies if those spin off, and they also establish relationships with larger corporate entities. They provide funding, and then I dropped in the logos of a lot of different others here. And this isn't meant to overwhelm or to make you think that you need this kind of thing at your institution to be able to engage in commercialization. It's just more to give you context about the environment in which we are operating, and we'll try to sort of boil it down to what are kind of the most key elements to get started. And then just more broadly in the state of Michigan, there are players outside of academia that support commercialization coming out of universities. So these are private sector and also government. So a few examples, this SBIR STTR is a federal program in the US that you may have heard of, and This provides funding directly to faculty and also to universities to encourage them to commercialize their ideas. And there's a lot of different focus areas that are aligned with the different federal agencies and their priorities. Specific to mobility, the state of Michigan has a funding platform where they offer funding to startups and also to faculty. And then there's a recently announced Michigan University Innovation Capital Fund. So this is a consortium of universities in the state that work together. And all of these entities, the types of support they're providing include funding, proposal preparation, getting ideas ready for investment, networking, of course, which is hugely important, advisory services, and other types of support. And now I will turn it over to Paul to talk more about what we're doing at WDI.
Okay, thank you, Dana. It's good to see you all today. So what I'll talk about is the approach that we've taken at WDI and also talk about some examples there. As Dana mentioned, our goal really is to take ideas for products or services that could be turned into commercializable products. So take ideas that are being developed by faculty or student groups at the University of Michigan and turn them into products that can be commercialized. And in doing so, working with faculty and other resources on campus to accomplish the goals. And as Dana mentioned, there are a number of different organizations. I sort of think of three main ones that are involved and need to be involved in almost any commercialization project. And that is the business school, because there's a lot of this that relates to market analysis and the operations and financing that requires business input. The law school, because there are a lot of contracting issues. Dana mentioned some of the IP that goes on, and then the engineering school on early design and also later design and adaptation as the product goes through further processes. She also mentioned, to me, this is one of the most interesting things, that this is a unique opportunity to capitalize on the pedagogy, some of the educational opportunities that are out there. So each of our schools, the law school has an international transactions clinic where law students, as part of their education, are required to do some work with companies. So we readily work with them, and in some sense, it's sort of free riding on their education. But from their perspective, they love it because it's real life law practice that they get. Similarly, engineering students are going out and observing what the needs are in the environment. They're coming up with some needs assessment and figuring out how to turn that into a product. And our business students, I've got some right now, working on projects, whether it's often it's related to market analysis for early companies, but there's also an element of financial analysis and thinking about the supply chain and how are you going to get products to the market. There are a lot of other resources on campus that Dana mentioned that complement the different schools. And what we try to do is put together a staged process. And we started with something that was, it's basically the process used at GE, but we also had input from people at other companies and looked at the stage gating process for taking a product from idea to the market, and then adapted it to what we had at the university and trying to figure out how we specifically fit into that at WDI. So we, our interest was in taking the theory and the ideas that are being taught in classrooms and applying them in real life settings to present these educational opportunities. And to be clear, our focus was always on low and middle income countries. So we're looking for products and services that had an application in low and middle income countries, because that's our focus at the William Davidson Institute. So here is an overview of the process at a high level. So the very early stage is discovery, where that's the research that's taking place. It could be needs assessment, people observing in the market. And then broadly speaking, there's technology development. Now I'll talk about this a little bit, but market analysis, it's really an iterative process, which Dana mentioned. You don't wait until pre-commercialization to do your market analysis. You do some high-level market analysis, even at the discovery stage, and definitely at the technology development, because there's no point in spending, well, if the researcher in engineering, say, wants to do more work on developing a product for their research purposes, that's fine. But if they're doing it because they think there's a commercially viable product, it's good for them to know early on, if you can tell from some high-level market analysis that this isn't going to go forward, it's good to let them know that. And then as you get further along in the process, you're doing more complete and comprehensive market and financial analysis in it. So this is sort of the high level overview. And if you go to the next slide, this shows all the specific steps that are in our process broken down into those 4 areas. And then Dana, if you go to the next slide, I won't go into those in detail. So how do we develop it? So we found that we were working with increasingly organizations across campus or faculty who had ideas that they wanted to see if there was a market for it. And when we looked around, we saw a lot of different individual programs within engineering, law, business school, but also other institutes on campus that we could and did tap into. But I wanted us to think sort of more systematically about how we could engage in that process and take advantage of those resources and provide the pedagogical opportunities, while also making sure that trying to identify products that had commercial opportunities and making sure that they were moving forward if they did. So we developed the map with a goal to communicate it to other shareholders, and also to other people. By shareholders, I mean other organizations within the university. And then it also helps us with our planning and process and making decisions, and figuring out who plays what role at what point. And we also have in there, in the context of the map, I'm not going to show this specifically, but who leads which process. One of the points I want to emphasize that Dana mentioned was, in order for a product to get forward in any business, a lot of it's mundane. And you can't, and within a university, there's a tendency to say, well, we do this, we do these different processes, but we don't get into X, Y, and Z. If you really want to commercialize something, you have to have somebody who's taking care of everything. It doesn't mean that they have to do it themselves, but they have to identify someone either within the university or outside the university who's going to take care of it. I do want to be clear that we're not pretending that this is the most efficient way to commercialize something. If you really want a company is going to be much more efficient because they don't have to wait on school calendars and they don't have to wait on student processes and whatnot. But this is an opportunity in a way to look into things that a company probably wouldn't, because it wouldn't warrant the risk of it, and the probability of success wouldn't warrant the investment, where we can do it because it's an educational exercise. We also want to try to identify those early on that have a higher probability of success, but we're willing to engage in things that a company probably wouldn't. It is going to take longer, as Dana mentioned, but it does provide opportunities for some of the research going out there that they wouldn't have otherwise. So go ahead to the next slide, Dana. And this is an example. This is just one of the steps that are in there. And so what each step would have, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but I just wanted to highlight one for you. We would have a goal for each step at the top. And then we would say, which process is involved in this? And is it primarily an engineering school? Is it primarily a business process? Is it primarily legal? We'd have a fairly specific description of the activity that is to take place. Now, each project is going to be different, and in some of them, some of these steps may not be relevant. And then we look at what are the resources that should be involved in this step. And for the one we're looking at here, the high-level market analysis, making the business case, that's something that WDI staff and students that we work with in the business school can take the lead on. We would also work with University of Michigan's International Transactions Clinic, that's ITC, in the law school. Sorry, is there a question? And then also with the innovator and the faculty member themselves. And if they, on all of this, if they want to take it, that's fine, that's up to them. But if they're looking to us for support, this is where we can, this particular step is an example where we can take more of a role. And Dana also mentioned the U of M Innovation Partnerships, which is at the university level, which works on the contracting and the signing IP to the faculty and to the other parties that would be involved in it. And then at the end of that process, so we've got our goal of what we want to get done, we would ask the question, is there a business, in this case, it would be, is there a business case that supports commercialization of the product? And if the answer is no, using that high-level analysis, we would go back to the innovator and say, look, it doesn't look like it warrants going forward at this point. If you want to adjust the product, and maybe we have some ideas on how it would, other features that it would need or something, then that's fine. We can revisit it later, but at this point, it's not going to go forward. If it does go forward, If it does look like it has a high-level business case, then we move it on to the next stage. So it's a very iterative process, and it's a very gradual process, because you would like to identify products that are not going to make it early on, so you cut the expenditure, the expense you have for it. You don't want to put a whole lot of time and a whole lot of money into something that clearly wasn't going to make it from the beginning. Okay, go ahead to the next slide, Dana. So here is an example of one that we are still working on, have been working on for a few years. The pictures at the right show, it's a hand device. It's a fairly simple hand device. It's for rehabilitation for a patient who has had some sort of hand surgery or some sort of trauma to their hand, and they need exercises to sort of to recover some of the strength and the mobility in the hand. So you can see some of them. There's a clip there that gets squeezed. There's a knob there at the bottom of the one on the right, which you turn. That plank you see on the picture on the left, you can move with your wrist up and down. This was initially designed in cooperation with a doctor in Ghana, and she is a rehab doctor, and she saw a need for this, and it was worked on by a group of students from our mechanical engineering department. And Dr. Kathleen Sienko is the one who was working on that from our side, from the U of M side. So the initial design was put together, and they designed it with the specific idea in mind of trying to make it something that was using all local materials. So we took that, and we then did some market analysis on it with another group of University of Michigan students. And we also costed it at a local provider. And they came back with a cost which was surprisingly high. It was $475 for this product. Because you can see there's nothing terribly complicated about it. It's a very simple product. And so we looked at that and thought, okay, that's not going to work. So we went on to the next stage. Dana, go ahead and move to the next slide. The next stage, I was talking to a professor in a different part of the engineering school, actually a different building in aerospace. And he asked if we had thought about 3D printing it. And we said, no, we hadn't. And this guy, because he's in aerospace engineering, he's very interested in 3D printing because that ends up being very light and it's good for aerospace. So he asked if we wanted to try that. So we sent the specs over to him. He said, sure. And he printed the version at the left, which is exactly the same as the wooden one, and used a lot of plastic. In fact, he came back to me and said, he made some comment about how much plastic it used. And I asked how much it cost to make it, and just the material alone was $1,000. So that's not going to work. But what he said is they could redesign it. And so he's had a couple students from aerospace engineering who weren't involved in the initial design, but they've been involved in this one, working on different designs for it. And they've brought the cost down to close to $10. So it is sort of this iterative process that we did some market analysis. We saw there was a market out there for it, but not at those price points. So we came back to engineering. They were able to turn it into something that was a much lower cost. And now we think we can, we think we're going to be able to produce this with, it also solves some supply chain problems because you just need the feeder stock for the 3D printer plus some bolts. Whereas before there were a lot of other parts that were needed for it. And we think we can actually generate the feeder stock itself with a 3D printer by using plastic bottles. That's what we're told by the engineering school, and we're trying that out. Now there's some challenges with that, but again, incredible learning opportunities for the students in the engineering school. I just had 2 students from business school come back and tell us some challenges that they were seeing and some recommendations they were seeing on how to go forward. So we've really, WDI has been involved and sort of is the link between all these different things and does the work in some cases, but we've relied heavily on student teams in engineering, in the law school, and the business school throughout. So that's an example of some of the stuff we've done. I'll finish just with an example of some work we're doing now where we're taking that same process and say, with a university in Southeast Asia has asked us, they're interested in doing something similar. It's primarily an engineering school, but they do have a business school associated with it too. And they have recently they started up a new division about 8 years ago that was trying to sort of identify business opportunities for some of the research taking place in the engineering school. And so they came to us and said, could we do something more complete on that? And we're in the process of working on that product now. We've been working on it over the past year. And what the process we're going through is we're looking at what they currently offer. What are the courses and programs they currently have within their university? And then we see, is there a way to change some of those or add something to some of those courses to make it so that it fulfills some of those gaps. So we're starting with the vision of what a commercialization plan, the different processes needed. And then we're looking at what they have within their university and seeing, do they have what do they have that fits some of those? And are there some things they could do with minor modifications that would make it so that they can fulfill others parts of it? And then what are parts that they're going to need outside partnerships for? So they don't have a law school. So they're, and the legal aspect of it is important, not just at the end, but throughout. And so having someone that you can interact with throughout is going to be important. So we're in the middle of that process. But there is, I'll tell you, one of the lessons that I've seen that I've been really interested in is two of the leaders of the commercialization process in this university are also chairs of departments within the College of Engineering there. But where their heart really is on the commercialization side. They're really excited about that. They're performing their duties as chairs of the departments within the engineering school out of a sense of obligation. They've been there a long time. They know what they're doing, but the stuff they really enjoy doing is the commercialization part. And over time, what we would expect to see is it's not, engineering can come up with designs, but if they're doing it in the absence of thinking about who are the customers and what's the value proposition, who would buy this, what price would they be willing to pay, you don't need any detail, but having some broad idea of that in the back of your mind, you can end up going down a strange path. But over time, if you have some of those products coming through, going to the market analysis, and then they get rejected and go back, the engineers are starting to think about, they're starting to incorporate that in their thinking from the beginning. So having that process across all the different, within the same unit, allows there to be some feedback that can improve the education and the work going on within the different schools that are there. So I'll turn it over to Dana now. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them. And then Dana, I think, has a couple other examples that we've walked through.
Yep, I'll just wrap it up by sharing a couple other examples more specific to energy. So another faculty that we've worked with these are both University of Michigan examples, and a faculty in the School for Environment, actually, with an engineering background. Excuse me, he worked with students to develop a biomass gasification technology. If you're not familiar, it takes agricultural residues, so sort of the waste from agricultural process, growing crops, puts it in this machine, heats it up with low oxygen, and it turns, if it's connected to a generator, it can be converted to power. And then it also produces this product called biochar, which is a soil amendment. So he came to us with a prototype and an interest in commercializing it, and given the focus on agriculture, saw great potential for low and middle income country markets. So we worked with him over the course of about 2 years, with our own staff and consultants, and also involving U of M students, as Paul shared in his examples. We were able to get an external grant to help with some of this work as well. And we helped in a lot of different ways. We followed sort of the process that Paul mentioned, and walked through various steps with him and went back and iterated. And so it kind of in parallel, as we were working on some of the business side of things, he was iterating on the technology with his students. So some of the things we did were market analysis at high level and deeper level, created a financial model for the potential company. And then we got pretty involved also in reaching out to potential customers and investors, both to understand, to kind of hear the voice of the customer, to do that market research, and then also to kind of put out feelers to see if we could help him set up some initial agreements. Another thing that we helped with that was sort of a blend between the business side and technology side was to help him think about moving the technology from prototype scale to commercial scale. So engaging a professional engineering and procurement firm to do, instead of what Paul mentioned with the students doing with the 3D printer, this was a much more complex machine. So we got an external firm with that specific expertise to do that. We also connected him with the legal resources at the law school at U of M. And what's pretty cool is that it's had sort of an unusual outcome for innovation starting in academia, but the faculty has actually left the university, and he, together with the students that were involved, have created a startup and a company in Costa Rica. And so they're fully committed and working on that. And right now they have a commercial scale product, and they're doing trials and have some customers lined up. Another example, and this is for a technology that's still at a much earlier stage. They're sort of in the basic research leading to the applied research stage, is that, and it's a technology to produce ammonia that can be used for fertilizer, but instead of a huge, large-scale sort of industrial process that's followed now, this technology would enable it to be done in a very small-scale distributed way, and it could use renewable energy. So just sort of changing the paradigm overall for how fertilizer can be produced. So this also has potential applications in low and middle income countries. So in this example, we got involved at a much earlier stage. So this group of faculty and their students received a grant from the National Science Foundation to keep advancing the technology. And as part of the goal to say how the future technology could be applied in the real world, we teamed up with them to kind of do that very initial market analysis to say, assuming everything works out with the research, would this type of product be commercially viable? And here, in terms of the iterative process, we were able to provide some interesting feedback about, what would the potential size of, ideal size of the product be, the potential ideal cost for it to be viable, those types of things. So we engaged a team of MBA students. So they did a lot of the heavy lifting. They traveled to different countries to do market research kind of on the ground and interview people and get to know specific to those countries, is this a go or a no-go? We also connected them to the legal resources at University of Michigan. And the faculty have created a company that's established in Michigan right now. As I mentioned, they're still working on the technology, but this is where it can be a slow process. So we'll continue working with them as they develop the technology.
Hi, Dana, would you allow me a question?
Yeah, sure. I'll just wrap it up
Yeah.
really fast. These are some of the takeaways here. I'll just leave them up on the screen so you can see, and then, open to questions. Go ahead.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm really impressed to see this presentation. Thank you, Paul and Dana and Diana, for giving us a few hours or minutes of your time to be with us today. So Paul, if you allow me, one question is, as you know, we've been working together for a couple of years now. Hopefully we'll continue to do so for the next few years. So how do you think we can strengthen the ties between the WDI and the state of Chihuahua? How can we implement, let's say, this kind of opportunities and support that you can give to research and commercial products that are being developed, let's say, in our schools here in Chihuahua? What do you think the roadmap for that will be?
So part of the reason I was laying out the process that we did is I really think it's a nice opportunity for universities. So if I just think about the pedagogical side of it, training is education is changing quickly in moving toward more action-based learning, what we call action-based learning or experiential learning. And commercialization projects are sort of ideal for providing opportunities along those lines in a variety of schools. So as I mentioned, the engineering school, we have programs there that are working on that, where they're trying to help students start thinking about doing needs assessment and putting that into practice in a way that comes up with new ideas that are going to be viable in the marketplace. That thought process is arguably something a university should be doing and can do very effectively. As a matter of fact, one of the professors there, one of the things she did is she trained people within an organization, within a large corporation, to do the same process internally, and they've taken it and run with it themselves. But a university could provide that service more generally to its students and make the link between the students and practice that much closer. I think we are seeing, and we are going to continue to see, a merging of education with professional practice. And we already do see that in that there are a lot of companies that have their own educational programs. There are a lot of schools that have action-based learning that work with companies. But I think efforts like this to increase the link between the two makes the students that much better. And it also makes it clear to the companies what they can get out of it. And the company's input to the university tells the university what kinds of skill sets are needed and what kinds of programs would be beneficial. So that's why this program I mentioned with the University in Southeast Asia, I'm a big fan of it, because what they're really trying to change their education and make it so that it fits more with what's needed with the companies when they get out of there. And at least within business, engineering, and law school, there are a lot of opportunities to do that. It's not limited to that. We also work with the medical school, with the nursing school. There's Institute of Social Research here that has been involved in a number of projects we have. So thinking about the overall process and what role can the university consciously play, they're already doing it. Most universities are already doing it to some extent. But thinking about a little bit more systematically on how you can put it in there can help both the education, but it can also help the company. And in the case of this university in Southeast Asia, they're not just taking products from their own faculty, but they're offering it as a service, outsourcing it to companies too. Because the companies may have products that don't pass the test in terms of an expected ROI based on what they know right now. But they may have some that they're sort of interested in exploring further. And they could turn those over to the university. The university can do it as part of their research and educational effort. It would cost something, but it might not cost as much as it would cost the company to do it. And so the university becomes a real partner with the company in that context. And thinking through that process in Chihuahua and how it makes most sense is something that I think we could definitely do and would be very interested in doing.
Yeah, so, well, as you know, well, you can hear me. Well, as you know, we already have a relationship to train teachers and students. We are still looking for more funding to continue that program for next year. So the intention maybe could be to add these processes, not just I will say maybe to add this kind of practical education that you are saying, and could be and this could be maybe another layer of the relationship between the WDI and the state of Chihuahua, in the sense that maybe we could work with the universities. Maybe next week that Diana will be here, having maybe these discussions with the local universities here, and kind of try to develop these kind of processes. So we just doesn't stop just in the training, but we can also add some practical, let's say, education, as you were saying. And this idea seems to be really interesting. Is the university not only focuses on developing the ideas of their students, but also kind of being the center for innovation of local companies that for some reason that I have seen the cases that you're saying. I mean, there are some companies on which the ROI or some internal processes do not allow X project that they are developing internally. But maybe through the local university and having you and the WDI as a partner, we could connect and look for opportunities to have commercial products, or at least try to launch some new ideas from the students or companies into the market. So thank you once again, Paul, for sharing this with you today. And we'll put this in the agenda with Diana. I know she has she already has a very complete week here next week with us. So we'll be talking about this.
That sounds great. And let me comment, Rafael in the comment section put some thoughts in there I think are spot on and I think worth commenting on. It says some thoughts on additional challenges. One is becoming an entrepreneur is very demanding. Managing to combine it with research and academia responsibilities is very challenging. That's absolutely right. And so that's part of the reason we were stepping in and saying to the faculty, if you want to see if there are possibilities, but you're not willing to devote the time, we can take on a role in that. And the role we play can be larger or smaller, depending on what the faculty wants to do. Taking risks, especially financial, is a risk. That's true. and that is a big deal. I will say, though, that there have been a number of products that have been developed by faculty at U of M that have been commercialized, that have made it to market. And then the third point is the set of skills required to mature and scale an ideal and commercial environment is very different than those required in academia. That's true too. And if you deal with faculty very much, you recognize they're really not, they don't think about the business aspects of it very much. But a way to deal with that, and Dana mentioned this, is what will often happen because of that is they'll end up licensing it to some other company that's going to take care of the marketing and the distribution, the further production. And that's part of the reason I emphasize marketing and finance in these products, because from the business side, many of these products, these ideas that are coming out are not, they're not going to form a new company. So you don't need to understand operations or management. But what you do need to understand is the market analysis, the financial analysis, in order to convince a company or have discussions with a company who might be interested in taking it from that point and putting it in part of their portfolio.
I have a question there, Paul. How do you deal with the fact that sometimes in order to enable this licensing scheme, you need an ecosystem to be mature in a region? So especially when you work with countries like Mexico, where ecosystems are not mature yet, usually you won't find those companies which can suck those, let's say, innovations and put them into a commercial scale, you know? So for instance, if you have some research in the US doing some cathode material for a battery, and then you have companies actually making batteries, then you can indeed go ahead and look for those companies and try to license the technology. But when you're in Mexico or other countries, usually you don't have that ecosystem, you know?
So you're saying it's difficult to license it to a company in Mexico?
Yeah, I would say not only in Mexico, but in general in low and medium income countries. Usually you don't have these ecosystems which are so mature, like to be able to to absorb and to use those research being done at the academia. To be honest, yeah, I'm from Mexico, and I haven't seen many cases in which this technology transfer actually happens for many reasons. Yeah, and I want to hear your experience in that respect. How do you see that? And another point would be the legal framework, something that is always very challenging, and I have seen it here in Mexico, especially on public institutions, is that researchers, they do something at the school or their university. It is financed with public funds, and the legal framework on the ownership of the IP, it's very vague. Yeah, it's not really clear whether it belongs to the university, it belongs to the researcher, and there are very few cases in which you actually see some of those innovations being translated into an actual commercial product, you know?
Yeah, so these two are related, I think, the 2 points you're making. And the upfront legal contracts and the IP rules are very important. And so understanding that upfront, and that's going to affect, if I know ex ante what the rules of the game are, it's going to affect how I behave. And this was an issue, there was a case many years ago now, where there was a question about whose intellectual property is it? Is it the faculty members when it takes place in a university, or is it the universities? And there was a decision made on that, but then many of the universities, but many of the universities, including University of Michigan, signed something automatically that assigns rights back to the faculty member for the most part. There are some special cases on that. And the Innovation Partnerships Office, they'll have clauses in there that the university has to get some funding back for some of the money they put into it, but basically the rights are there. But whoever gets assigned those, that needs to be established up front. I think you're exactly right. And it's in the interest of all parties to do that, to get rid of the uncertainty associated with it, because after the fact, it's going to be very difficult to arrive at an agreement. But it's in the interest of the university to make that clear, and maybe work with the government to figure out what are the rights going to be, and commit to them up front. As to the licensing, there are a couple other thoughts I have in that. I also did observe in another country a government that was providing a lot of the funding for innovation, but because they were funding it and the way they did it, you filed for this funding up front and said what you were going to do. And even if in the middle of it, you determined that the initial plan didn't make any sense, you were required by the government to continue on with the path that you had laid out, which made no company would do that. They would have readjusted right away. So it made it so it was worthless, and it was actually very costly from the perspective of the person receiving the funding in that case. But I have seen other cases where ideas are developed in one country and there's a license that is drawn across countries. And so if you have an idea that comes out of one country, it doesn't need to stay in that country. If the licensing party, if the company that's licensing the technology and the right to use it can come to a comfortable agreement in terms of the intellectual property, which returns to your point about establishing the intellectual property, they'll be willing to do that, and they'll take it and move it into part of their portfolio. So I have seen that happen, but I readily acknowledge that it's a challenge. And setting the rules, not just with licensing, but governance, and there are all sorts of things that you really want to set the rules for that up front. Because once the company starts being developed and it gets to a certain point, if it's very successful, you know, everyone's going to want to take credit for it. So you really want to have that well-defined before you get to that point. And similarly, if it's not successful, everyone's going to want to have the others incur the costs for it. So you really need to have that established up front. And I think that's why the legal part of it, I think, is really something that needs to be emphasized.
Yes. And one question: would the institute could be supportive in finding potential targets, let's say in the US, to license some technologies developed in low and medium income countries? That is that one of the services or the activities that take place at the institute?
It could be, certainly. And certainly we've done hundreds of projects on market entry strategy with different companies over the years, many of them in the US, but not all of them.
Yeah.
And part of those market entry strategies are that again, these are MBA students that would do this. At the end, they would make a recommendation on whether to go on your own or to license this technology. A lot of these are in the medical field, and almost always that it makes sense to license it in the medical field, and actually in most fields, because ideas that are coming out of a university somewhere are not likely to make it. They're not going to start up some big company on that. So if you're licensing the technology, then part of the recommendation would not only be to license it, but to identify specific players for whom this would be a good fit, like that they are in this general area, but they don't have a product in this particular area, so this would make them more competitive. So that would certainly be something that would be part of the product. But that's sort of the easy part. The most difficult part is actually developing the relationship, having the conversation, absolutely, and signing that contract. And that's why, you know, in the work that we've done, we work with, we've been very purposeful in identifying individuals who have been in the marketplace. So there was someone from GE, he was there for 20 years and he saw this process over and over. He's one of them that helped us develop that stage processing. There's someone else that we're working with regularly from Pfizer, who's actually working on the commercialization project in Southeast Asia with us. And he also has seen what goes on and what needs to happen. And going back to Dana's point from the beginning, setting expectations right is important. The probability that any given product or service makes it to market is very, very low. And in order to make it through, but you are going to have to tackle these tougher problems at the end. But if you have had a process in place that makes it so that the product or service that gets that far is quite good and has withstood not only on the technology side of does this product work, but also on the market analysis side, is it viable? Is it something that customers value? Makes those conversations that much easier. But I'm not going to pretend, you know, we don't have some magic, I don't have the CEOs of all the Fortune 500 in my Rolodex that I'm going to go calling once a product gets out there. So I readily acknowledge that is a challenge that is going to have to be dealt with. But I think it can be, and we have seen instances where this has worked from a university.
Thank you, Paul.
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you.
I need to leave right now, Diana. Sorry for
Fernando. Thank you so much for joining us.
No, thank you. Thank you. It was a pleasure to see you, to see Paul. Hopefully we'll be able to meet you in person. So thank you very much. It was a great presentation.
Thank you, Fernando. I'm just curious to hear if there's anybody else from the universities who would like to, has any questions or anything? Or any reactions based on the presentation as well?
We have a raised hand from Oscar.
Beautiful. Oscar, adelante.
Yes, thank you. Yes, it's on the biomass gasification technology example. My question is, what prompted faculty to work in such project? Did they respond to a preliminary request for proposal, or it was a spontaneously conceived initiative?
Dana, do you want to talk to that one?
Go ahead. I'm not sure actually of the origins. I know he worked on the technology for several years before it got to the prototype stage.
Yeah, so he's from Costa Rica originally, so moving the company there was sort of a natural for him. And working in seeds, this was his particular area of expertise that he was focused on. So I don't think he was responding to a proposal. I think it was I never asked him this question exactly, but I think it was his line of research that he was interested in. And then he thought, wait, there's a way to apply this in settings that I know of.
Thank you.
He was also able to get several different research grants to kind of keep it moving to the next phase. Any other?
One question about the process. Yeah, you shared one slide of the process that you have in place. Is that the process that is publicly available? That can be looked somewhere, or you can share?
Yes, yeah, we'd be happy to provide that.
Okay.
And I also want to make clear, we're not saying this is the right way to do it. This is just our way to do it based on what we've observed within the University of Michigan.
Sure, there is no magic formula, but at least
Right.
some
But
methodologies.
You're welcome to take it and adjust it however you see fit.
Yeah, and I know we plan to share the slides sharing the slides as well as the full roadmap, I believe, process, right, Dana? Yeah.
Yep.
Awesome. Dana, did you have anything else in terms of?
No, that was it. Yeah, I think we are at time. 2 minutes for reactions or time or questions, or else we can wrap it up if no. Yeah, Oscar?
Yes. Does the University of Michigan have its own patents attorney? And does he or she charge students and faculty for his or her services?
Yes, I believe this is part of the innovation partnerships. So they work with the faculty on invention disclosures and patents. And Paul, you might know about more of the financial arrangements with that.
Well, that's part, yeah. So they'll go through and look, and is this something that's patentable and through the process, but that's part of when they put together their package for financing for the IP, they put in some compensation for themselves to have gone through that process. It's not onerous at all. It's a very good deal. Some of the faculty don't like it because they don't like giving up any of their revenue stream, but just from a perspective of what they would pay if they were in the marketplace, it's a very good deal they get.
Thank you.
Thank you, Oscar, for your questions, and thank you everyone for joining. I hope it was helpful and valuable. Would really appreciate the discussion and the opening as well. And thank you, Dana and Paul, for sharing all of that information with us today.